Everyone thinks Annie Hall was Woody Allen's love letter to Diane Keaton. But 50 years later, Woody has finally admitted a truth that recontextualizes their entire relationship. It wasn't a tribute. It was a confession of a regret he couldn't speak out loud until it was almost too late. To the outside world, Woody Allen and Diane Keaton were the ultimate intellectual dream team of 1970s American cinema. They represented a highly specific, romanticized ideal of Manhattan intellectualism, neuroses packaged as charm, awkward stammering elevated to high art, and a mutual obsession with European art cinema, modern art, and psychoanalysis. We watched them chase escaped lobsters in a beachside kitchen, argue about Marshall McLuhan in a movie theater line, and walk along the East River with the Queensboro Bridge glowing in the background. It felt so incredibly real because, for a time, it was. They were partners in life and art, creating a cinematic language that shifted the landscape of romantic comedies forever. But beneath the gorgeous black and white cinematography and the witty, self-deprecating banter lay a much darker, incredibly complex reality. It was a relationship defined by a massive imbalance of power, hidden personal torment, and a tragic inability to communicate outside of a movie script. Following Diane Keaton's quiet passing in late 25, the public facade of their legendary partnership finally shattered. Woody, now standing on the precipice of his 90th year, has begun to speak with an unprecedented, raw vulnerability about the woman who was his ultimate muse, revealing a lifetime of deep-seated regret that he kept buried for over half a century. To understand Woody's regret, we have to dismantle the myth of the passive muse. Diane Keaton was never just an actress. She was, as Woody confessed in his memoir, apropos of nothing, his absolute North Star, the singular moral compass he oriented his life around. When they met in 1968 for Play It Again, Sam, Woody was instantly transfixed, comparing her to a gorgeous female Huckleberry Finn whose presence lit up the entire boulevard. They fell into a passionate romance, but as their professional success soared, their personal connection rotted. Woody's rigid, controlling personality created an atmosphere where Diane felt constantly evaluated. While they were dating, Diane was quietly battling severe bulimia, a grueling disorder she hid from Woody for 5 long years, purging in secret in his bathrooms. Woody, completely absorbed in his own neuroses and his relentless pursuit of artistic control, noticed absolutely nothing. He was entirely blind to the profound suffering of the woman sleeping right next to him. But wait. The story you think you know about their 70s breakup is just a smoke screen. The real mystery, the terrifying paradox that baffled Hollywood for decades, happened 40 years later, when the entire world demanded that Diane Keaton denounce Woody, and she chose instead to set her own career on fire to defend him. There is a secret, unspoken pact they made, one that Woody only confessed after Diane's quiet passing in late 25. And it involves a private, unread letter that changes everything we know about their final days. To fully comprehend why this loyalty is so shocking, we have to look at what happened immediately after their initial split. When their romantic relationship fractured in the mid-70s, Diane sought out completely different psychological spaces. She entered into intense, high-profile relationships with Warren Beatty and Al Pacino, men whose raw, brooding, and uncompromising masculinity stood in direct contrast to Woody's intellectual, anxious persona. For Woody, watching the woman he worshipped find passion in the arms of Hollywood's ultimate alpha males was a slow, agonizing torment. He had to confront the reality that his intellectual superiority couldn't keep her, and that his inability to see her true pain had pushed her into the arms of others. Yet, despite this painful separation, their professional and emotional bond never truly severed. They continued to collaborate on masterpiece after masterpiece, operating under an unspoken arrangement where Diane remained his creative anchor, even as her romantic life belonged to others. This created a strange, haunting dynamic where Woody was constantly competing with the ghosts of her other lovers, using his films to subtly communicate the things he could never say to her face. Then came the storm that would forever divide Hollywood. In 1992, when the devastating allegations of sexual abuse were made against Woody by Mia Farrow, the industry began to turn its back on him. Decades later, during the cultural reckoning of the Me Too movement, that quiet blacklisting became absolute. Woody Allen was labeled a pariah. High-profile actors who had won Academy Awards in his films publicly expressed deep regret for ever working with him, donating their salaries to charity to distance themselves from his name. But Diane Keaton refused to bend. In 2018, at the absolute height of the industry's outrage, Diane did the unthinkable. She took to social media, shared a 26-year-old 60 Minutes interview of Woody defending himself, and declared to the world, "Woody Allen is my friend and I continue to believe him." Why would a beloved, universally adored star, an Oscar-winning actress, and a mother of 2 adopted children risk her entire legacy, her commercial endorsements, and her social standing to stand by a man the public had already condemned to exile? This is where the paradox of choice becomes so fascinating. Diane was not a naive bystander. She was a brilliant, fiercely independent woman with everything to lose. Her unwavering support was not born out of blindness, but out of a profound, private understanding of Woody's psychological makeup. She knew his deepest vulnerabilities, his crippling anxieties, and his profound fragility. She recognized that without her validation, Woody would be completely destroyed. Her public loyalty was a calculated, deeply emotional choice to serve as his shield, even if it meant absorbing the blows herself. But this loyalty came with a devastating psychological price for Woody. Her defense of him didn't alleviate his guilt. It amplified it tenfold. He realized that the woman he had failed to protect, the woman whose silent suffering he had ignored during their youth, was now sacrificing her own hard-won reputation to protect him from the world. It was a complete reversal of roles. The quirky, dependent girl of Annie Hall had become the formidable protector, while the intellectual giant was reduced to a helpless bystander, watching his savior bleed for him. This realization is the core of Woody's late-stage regret. In the intimate reflections shared after Diane's death in late 25, Woody admitted a truth that completely recontextualizes Annie Hall. He confessed that the film was never actually a tribute to Diane's independence. It was a subconscious attempt to capture her in a cage. By writing and directing the movie, Woody had immortalized Diane as a charming, stammering, slightly flighty character who needed Alvy Singer to guide her, educate her, and introduce her to the world of art and literature. He had reduced a deeply complex, fiercely ambitious, and multi-dimensional artist to a quirky, non-threatening caricature that he could control on a strip of celluloid. He realized, too late, that he had boxed her in. He had used his power as an auteur to frame her identity, denying her the very agency she was fighting to claim in real life. His regret is the painful recognition that his need for control, his desire to be the intellectual mentor, was the very thing that made a lasting, healthy partnership with her impossible. He locked her in his films so he would never have to confront the terrifying reality of her true, untamable independence. To see this dynamic in action, we only need to look at the final, iconic scene of Annie Hall. We see Alvy and Annie meeting one last time on a sunlit corner of the Upper West Side, sharing a warm, nostalgic laugh before going their separate ways. Woody's famous closing monologue compares relationships to an absurd, irrational need for eggs, something painful and crazy, but ultimately necessary. For 50 years, film scholars and audiences have celebrated this ending as a beautiful, bittersweet acceptance of life's fleeting romances. But in light of Woody's recent admissions, that scene takes on a tragic, almost ghostly quality. It wasn't a mature acceptance of letting go. It was Woody's subconscious attempt to rewrite reality. He used the medium of film to convince himself that letting Diane go was a poetic, natural transition, rather than a devastating failure of his own making. It was a coping mechanism masquerading as high art. The real-life Diane Keaton didn't just walk away into a beautiful New York afternoon. She carried the heavy, unresolved weight of their complicated bond throughout her entire life. She chose to remain single, never marrying, and constantly navigated the overwhelming shadow of the man who had defined her youth. Now, near his 90th birthday, Woody is left to confront the finality of her absence. Following Diane's death, reports surfaced of a private, emotional letter that Woody had written to her, a letter he had spent months drafting, attempting to articulate the raw depth of his gratitude and his lifelong regrets. Tragically, she passed away before he could send it, leaving his final confessions forever unread by the only person who truly mattered. This letter, which remains a silent testament to their 56-year bond, represents the ultimate tragedy of their relationship. A lifetime of unspoken words, delivered too late. Woody is left to spend his remaining days in his East Side townhouse, surrounded by the physical remnants of a legendary career. His 50 films, his Windsor font scripts, his jazz records, but utterly isolated by his regrets. He is forced to live with the devastating knowledge that the most profound love story he ever wrote was the one he was too cowardly, too self-absorbed, and too controlling to actually live in the real world. The ultimate tragedy of Woody Allen and Diane Keaton is that they could only find perfect harmony when they were pretending to be someone else on screen, leaving the real people behind to suffer the consequences of a lifetime of unspoken truths. In the end, the Diane Keaton truth is not just about a movie, or a director, or a muse. It is a cautionary tale about the high cost of creative obsession. It shows us that sometimes, the very things we build to immortalize our love are the exact things that destroy its chance to survive in the real world. Diane Keaton is gone, and Woody Allen stands on the precipice of his own final act, reflecting on a life defined by the one person who never left, even when he pushed her away. If you want to understand the deeper, darker psychological forces that shaped the golden age of cinema, and how other legendary directors used their real-life muses as both inspiration and collateral damage, click on the video on your screen right now. We dive deep into the hidden, toxic dynamics of Hollywood's most celebrated creative partnerships, and the shocking prices paid behind the scenes for the masterpieces we still love today.